This podcast contains descriptions of violence against children and adult language and is not suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Hi guys, and welcome to Suffer the Little Children, the true crime podcast giving voices back to the victims of child abuse and shining a harsh spotlight on the parents, guardians, and caretakers who silence them. I'm your host, Lane, and this is episode 36, Jacob Landin, Part 2. On last week's episode, I told you the story of Jacob Landin, a beautiful, happy 9-month-old boy bursting with life and personality, whose death from blunt force trauma to the head has been unresolved for over 33 years. Despite investigators zeroing in on a single suspect, the case, which over the years saw a periodic resurgence in police interest, has gone officially unsolved, and the man believed to have caused Jacob's death has gone unpunished. For this week's episode, I had the honor of speaking with Jacob's older brother, Eric Carter-Landin. Eric, who was 6 at the time, was initially blamed for causing Jacob's death, and he has channeled his traumatic childhood experiences and the loss of his beloved brother into his own true crime podcast, True Consequences. This is part 2 of the infuriating story of Jacob Landin. If you haven't listened to episode 35 yet, I'd recommend doing that before you listen to this one so you have an idea what Jacob's case is about before listening to me and Eric discuss the details in our interview. Please enjoy this podcast promo for Eric's show.
Hey everybody, this is Eric Carter-Landin, the host and producer of True Consequences podcast. True Consequences is a true crime and mystery podcast with stories based in New Mexico and the American Desert Southwest. I started this show to bring light to cases that need to be solved in my state. You see, my brother was murdered 33 years ago, and his murderer still walks free. So I cover cases with an empathetic lens, because I understand what it's like to seek justice for a family member. I hope you'll give True Consequences a chance. You can find me wherever you listen to podcasts.
I want to give a shout out to my newest supporters, Lucy V. from Raleigh, North Carolina, and Eric from New Mexico. Thank you so much for pledging your monthly support to the podcast. It really does mean the world to me. As I've said before, Suffer the Little Children, both the blog and the podcast, is a one-person operation. It's just me, myself, and I doing all the research, writing, recording, editing, production, marketing, artwork, you name it. My ultimate goal is to be able to devote myself full-time to Suffer the Little Children on a permanent basis, and every monthly pledge brings me that much closer to my goal. I truly appreciate your support. If anyone else would like to support the show, you can visit www.sufferthelittlechildrenpod.com and click Become a Patron. I will also gratefully accept one-time donations at www.sufferthelittlechildrenblog.com/support. On that note, here's my interview with Jacob Landin's older brother and the host of the True Consequences podcast, Eric Carter-Landin. My guest today on the podcast is Eric Carter-Landin, who is Jacob's brother, who was 6 years old at the time of Jacob's death. Hi, Eric. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. I'm glad you brought this case to my attention because even though it happened 33 years ago, Jacob absolutely deserves to be remembered and he deserves justice. And I can't imagine how frustrated you and your family are.
It's definitely been a challenge. And I definitely want to say thank you to you for highlighting his case because, you know, it's not a famous case. It's not well known. And it has definitely been frustrating. I think frustrating is probably an understatement at this point.
Sure. I can only imagine. And it's incredible how many of these cases do go under the radar and might even go unprosecuted. Just some that I've covered myself. I'm still waiting to see. Come on, get somebody arrested here. But I can't remember exactly what the statistic is. It's something like 4 to 7 kids die of abuse every day in the U.S. It's unbelievable. And I wondered why my list of cases to try to cover gets longer and not shorter as I get through them. But my gosh, it's awful.
It's horrifying. And it's been somewhat of a mission of mine to highlight it on my show as much as possible as well, because I do feel like there's a propensity to either not prosecute or maybe go a little bit softer on charges in these cases, especially in New Mexico. And as the years went by, I found myself becoming more and more frustrated watching these cases pop up left and right, knowing that, things just weren't getting better. They aren't improving in New Mexico. And I'm sure it's the same case across the US. But it's been a very challenging and difficult conversation to have because it makes people uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I've mentioned my podcast or my blog to people and they just say, "Oh, sorry, but I can't hear stories about children." And it's just so frustrating because you have to pay attention to what's going on.
Well, exactly. You can't ignore these problems away. They
Right.
just get worse. So
yeah, I know it's hard and triggering for people, but that's why I just can't stop doing this. It's important. It's essential. These kids deserve our attention. And if we don't pay attention, then who's going to?
Right.
Were you born in Texas? I know Jacob was.
No, I was born in Socorro, New Mexico.
You were?
Yeah, that's where my family's from.
Okay.
My grandparents got married there. They met each other there. My mom was born just about 30 minutes north of there. But we've all lived there pretty much our entire lives.
That's where you moved back after your parents divorced.
Yes.
I'm going to call him the suspect because I don't, obviously we're not going to use his name and I don't know what else to call him. So where did he live when he kind of started worming his way into your life and interfering in your parents' marriage?
His family is very similar to my family in the sense that they were all raised and born in Socorro as well.
Okay.
In fact, he was my father's best friend.
Mm-hmm.
So,
all right. And where did he live? I mean, was he in New Mexico when he was kind of planting those seeds of doubt in your mom's mind?
Yeah. So all of that happened after my mom and I moved back to New Mexico together to go live with my grandparents once my parents had separated. Okay.
And your mom did ultimately marry the suspect. So how did you come to terms with that? I mean, I know there's been a lot in between and you guys talked about a lot of abuse and things that went on during that marriage. But I imagine it was hard for you at the time.
I don't even remember them getting married. I believe that there were some kind of financial reasons why they did that. I'm not sure what that was. They went ahead and got married at the Justice of the Peace, and I wasn't there. I think they did it when I was in school. So I remember them coming home or me coming home after school and being told that they were married. It didn't really mean anything to me at that point. And prior to the marriage, there really wasn't any physical abuse that I was aware of. It was after they got married that everything started to get really crazy. But I don't remember really having an opinion about it. Honestly.
Do you know about when that was?
When they got married?
Yeah.
I think it was in 1988. I don't know the month and day though.
And then once you got older and the abuse was going on, and did you question why your mom would marry him?
I don't think that I did. I was very much in survival mode at that point. I think I questioned why we didn't leave more than that. I really wasn't concerned about her being married to him. It was more about, I just wanted us to get out of there and be safe. Like I didn't understand why we were still there. And then he started with the death threats, and then it made sense to me, that we didn't leave.
Right. Do you want to talk at all about what you guys went through? I know you went over it at length in your interview with your mom, which was excellent. I've listened to it twice. I mean, she seems like the best lady in the world. But I know you went through an awful lot.
Yeah. I mean, I'm willing to talk about it. I've always said that I can't expect things to change if I'm not willing to talk about what happened. And if, and this isn't anything against people who aren't ready to talk. But I do think it's important to share those experiences, as horrible as they are, because I think people need to know that this happens, and it happens a lot. And silence really, in my opinion, is permission for it to continue.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's 4 women a day now are being murdered by an intimate partner or a former partner in the US alone. It's insane.
Yeah. Coronavirus has definitely made things much worse for domestic violence victims and child abuse victims.
It definitely has. Nobody's seeing them, so they can't even vet the issue. Yeah,
exactly.
It's terrible.
It's horrifying to think about.
Yeah, I think, I mean, just the idea that this guy definitely had narcissistic or psychopathic traits. I mean, no doubt about it. And that conversation just doesn't come up enough. And I feel so strongly about there being education on that, just looking for those signs, just even in high school during sex ed or whatever it has to be. Because if younger women, especially, but if younger people knew what to look for, I would hope that they could avoid those relationships, because it is so damaging.
It's really hard to know, what you're getting yourself into. And I talked about this a little bit on my interview with my mom, but he was very charming and charismatic and outgoing, and everybody liked him. And I'm sure that's still the case for him. He's probably still very popular and friendly and happy-go-lucky. And that was the personality that he portrayed to the public. When you got him behind closed doors in an intimate setting, where it was 1-on-1 or 2-on-1, he would change. Something in him shifted. He became a different person. It was almost, this is going to sound cliche, but it's the only parallel that I can come up with in my mind off the top of my head is the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde situation, where you see this person. He seems like an upstanding citizen. His father is a minister. His family are all church-going people. He's well-liked and respected in the community. He plays basketball with the police department every weekend. So, when people ask things like, how did your mom miss the signs? Or why did she not suspect something was going on? This is why. Her entire life, she's known this man. She grew up with him. They went to school together. He was best friends with my dad. We didn't think that there was anything wrong with him. He was really good at pretending that he was okay.
It's a nightmare. You don't know what you're getting into until it's too late, because they love bomb you, like you said, and just make everything seem perfect until suddenly it's not. And until it's not. Yeah, you're stuck.
And in the 80s, I don't think that people were as educated about things like love bombing or gaslighting or any of those things. It wasn't part of our vernacular. It wasn't something that people talked about. And even, knowing people were being abused, there was this kind of mentality of, that's not our business. It has nothing to do with us. We're going to stay out of it. And that was pretty damaging as well. But when things started changing, which was shortly after they were married, he would fly into these fits of rage for seemingly no reason. And really it would turn into the situation where, I was blamed for let's say, giving him a dirty look because I looked at him, right? Like, he would be having a conversation. He would say something that maybe interested me. I would look up. All of a sudden he accuses me of giving him dirty looks. My mom would come to my defense, and then he would just start beating the crap out of her. And I can't tell you the number of times that I saw him grab my mom by the hair, drag her into their bedroom, and then I would just hear her scream for hours. And it was horrifying. It was an actual living nightmare. I was so afraid for my life and for my mom's life that I slept with a butcher knife, a can of the old-fashioned hairspray that was very flammable, and a lighter under my pillow. I also had a baseball bat under my bed, and I was like 9 years old.
Yeah, that's got to be so traumatic. And I know your mom And you both mentioned, having PTSD, which would be totally understandable. I don't know how you can trust anyone at that point. It takes so much work to just get your sense of trust back, or even your sense of self after living through something like that.
Yeah, and we lived with him from the time I was 6 until the time I was 11, and probably from the time I was like 7.5 until I was 11, there was nonstop physical, emotional, and mental abuse. I was never physically abused by the man. He never hit me or pushed me or did anything other than, one day he locked me in the clothes dryer for about 6 hours. That was the extent of the physical stuff that he did with me, aside from the sexual abuse that happened much later. But he got angry with me because he felt like I was using the wrong knife to put mayo on a sandwich. And so he shoved me into a dryer and then put a chair against it so I couldn't get out. And I was there for the entire day, couldn't do anything. He would often lock me in my room for hours and hours at a time. He told me that I was stupid and annoying and in the way. And basically, I would not be allowed to use the restroom if he didn't feel like letting me use the restroom.
He wanted you to know, and he wanted everyone to know in the house he was the boss.
He was in charge. And every time we would go out to anything, I remember there was an Easter picnic, and it was going to be his kids and me and my mom and him. But the night before, he beat my mom so bad that she was black and blue all over her body. Her eye was swollen shut. Her lip was really fat. And for about 2 hours before we went to the picnic, he was like a drill sergeant. He was walking back and forth. We were lined up, and we had to go over the official story that we were going to present to people when they asked us what happened to my mom. It was like brainwashing. When people ask you what happened to your mom, what are you going to say? And we would have to repeat over and over again. And I believe that excuse was that she was in a motorcycle accident with him. But he had no scratches or anything on him. So that didn't really make any sense, but people seemed to buy it at the picnic. Well, and I think that there was, again, that mentality of he's such a nice guy. He would never do anything like that. So I feel like probably a lot of people maybe just pushed it back to the back of their mind because they felt like they knew him.
Yeah, they're very good at that, camouflage in the community and things like that.
Mm-hmm. And Socorro's a tiny town. It's so small. People joke you can't even use the restroom without everybody knowing. Yeah, and things kept getting worse, and there were a bunch of other horrible things that he did. Like one time he got mad at me, and so he ran over my puppy.
Oh my God.
And made sure to show me the dog when he ran over it. He actually put the dog on a shovel because he was going to go bury him in the yard, and put the shovel spade up to my face and made me look at him. There's so many other things he did that were just horrendous. One incident in particular, I talked about it with my mom, was when he nearly strangled her to death. And had I not broken out of my room and thrown rocks through their bedroom window, he probably would have killed her. But because I did that, he stopped strangling her and chased me down the road, which gave her enough time to get up and run away. She was losing consciousness at the time. And I had panicked because they had been fighting for so long, and suddenly she just stopped screaming. And I knew that something was wrong. I just had that feeling that something was very wrong. And so that's when I busted out of my bedroom and did everything I could to get him to stop whatever he was doing. And, I had been locked in my room at that point, so I couldn't just go through the bedroom door. I had to actually break the window in my bedroom.
How old were you?
I think I was probably 10 years old.
And you just sacrificed yourself to save your mom, which is incredible.
I didn't even think about it. It was just a kind of a gut reaction. And my mom told me that, I saved her life that day, which, like I said, I didn't even think about it. It just happened. It was just like an instinct.
Was there something that triggered your mom to leave?
Yeah. I kind of mentioned some sexual abuse. There was one night where my mom was at work. She was a waitress at that time. And she was working an evening shift. And he had He basically sexually abused me and told me that if I ever said anything, that he was going to kill me and my mom, and nobody would ever know, and they would never find our bodies. And I was about 11 years old when this happened. And I just remember being so afraid. My mom came home in the middle of it, and he told me to close my bedroom door, go to sleep, and act like nothing happened. I basically cried myself silently to sleep that night. I just couldn't say anything because I didn't want us to die.
Right. And at that point, he had proven that he could get away with murder. So why wouldn't you believe him?
At the same time, he was also trying to groom my 14-year-old cousin to abuse her as well. She lived with my grandparents at the time, and he would call over there and try to talk to her and try to get her to come over. He would say things like, oh, I think you're so beautiful, and I really want you to come over and spend some time with me, but you can't tell anybody because nobody else would understand. Typical child predator things that they say. But what he didn't know was that my cousin was a loudmouth, and that my cousin wasn't afraid of anybody. And she actually had no reason to be afraid because she didn't know what was happening behind closed doors at our home. She's still the same way. She's a loudmouth. She's opinionated. She doesn't care. And I love that about her, and I was afraid. I was scared for my life and my mom's life. And so she started telling everybody that would listen to her. She told my grandparents. She told my mom. She told her mom. She told her dad. She told everybody she could think of what was happening. And that was enough. My mom had enough at that point. So she left him, and he was too afraid, I think, because of what he had done to me and because of what he tried to do to my cousin. I think he was too afraid of getting arrested for those things that he backed off a little bit. I mean, he started to stalk us. So he would follow us around a lot. If he saw us in town, he would tailgate us as long as he could. He would go to my window at night in my house and tell me that he was going to kill me and my mom. I used to sleep under my bed every night because I was so afraid.
And how long did that go on?
That went on for, I would say, at least 2 years.
And did you say she got a restraining order against him?
Yeah. So there's a lot of weird things with this case. One of the things is we filed a report with the police about the sexual abuse that happened to me. Nothing ever happened with that. I think my cousin also filed a report about his grooming and what he was doing there. There was no follow-up. The abuse was so intense and horrifying that the judge actually gave my mom an annulment rather than a divorce on the marriage. And with that annulment came a lifetime order of protection. However, there is no record of this. There's no record of the order of protection. It doesn't exist as far as the court's concerned. They don't have any copies of it. They don't have any documentation that it happened. Even though I have a copy of it, they claim that there isn't one.
Interesting. It's funny how documents seem to be missing in this case like that.
Yeah, or, recordings of confessions.
Did they ever say what he confessed to other than his multiple stories about the various accidents that may or may not have happened?
No, there's no transcript, there's no recording, and there's no documentation of what was said. All we know is there was a confession. We don't know what the confession was.
Yeah, I saw a couple of mentions. They had said something about a confession, but yeah, there's no documentation of that anywhere.
No.
It's so hard to find where the line is between ineptitude and corruption when everything's so muddy.
At the best, they were negligent. At worst, they're covering it up. And there's nothing anybody can tell me that's going to change my mind on that. They're either completely negligent or completely corrupt. And I'm not sure which one it is. And I can't prove any of it. But it's very clear when you look at the case file. And I think even the cold case investigator had a sense of that as well.
Right. He did. He said something about not understanding why it didn't proceed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it seems like you got a couple of good investigators in there, but they hit the same wall. It was at Burwell. It seems like he stood in the way quite a bit.
Yeah, the DA.
Yeah, I think he was
DA,
eventually, right. Yeah.
He was like ADA back then.
Yeah.
Yeah, he definitely was in the way. Lee Deschamps, another district attorney, He accused my mom of changing her story.
Right. So your mom didn't, basically she had said she didn't think he was capable of it.
Right.
And
because we didn't.
Right. Right. Because you hadn't seen that side of him at all.
And then we did. And then we thought he was totally capable of it. And his opinion and his attitude was like, oh, you're just a woman scorned, trying to get revenge against your poor husband that everybody likes, who happens to work for the county and has keys to every building, including my office.
They said something about that she gave him an alibi. They used the word alibi. And then when I read, all she said was she didn't think he could do it. I even wrote in my notes, that's not an alibi.
That's not an alibi. Yeah.
No, it's a statement of character, maybe.
Also, how can she give him an alibi when she wasn't there?
Right. She was at work, yeah. The police reports were very enlightening.
Yeah.
Some, you could tell they were really actually working and trying to find out what happened. And then others, it was like, it didn't make a lot of sense. But it seems fairly clear since, the injuries only occurred when Jacob was in the suspect's care.
Right.
And I know you were
and I was
blamed for it.
Yep. And I was removed from the situation, so I couldn't have been there to do that. He did blame me, but that was his MO. He was very good at accusing other people of doing the things that he was doing.
Yep. Projecting. How old were you when you realized that Jacob's death wasn't your fault? And how long did you carry that guilt?
It was shortly after the funeral when I put it all together in my mind. After Jacob died, this man kept trying to get my mom to talk to him. I think he was trying to do damage control, but he kept trying to get her to go with him to Jacob's grave, which was weird. And I would just say that's a huge red flag. And my mom luckily was smart enough to not go to the graveyard to meet him. I mean, this graveyard is pretty isolated. It's still in town, but it's far away from any homes, and there's rarely anybody there. It's kind of like in the desert, a little bit in the hills, kind of outside of town. And so, she was resisting him and resisting talking to him. She's grieving her baby, and all these things are happening. We're living with my grandparents again, and he kept trying to get to her. So he would leave messages for her at work and notes on her car and like all of these things to try to get her to talk to him. I have some of those notes still. They're still in my possession. They're really crazy and nonsensical. I remember one day he pulled up to my grandparents' house, and my grandfather he jumped out of his chair, and I'd never seen him move that fast, honestly.
That's a dad's instincts right there.
Yeah, he was pretty lazy for the most part. I mean, he worked and stuff, but he would just hang out in his chair and watch TV all day. And so to see him jump like that, I was shocked. And so I got up and I followed him, and he goes bounding out the door, and he starts yelling at him, and he says, "Why don't you hit somebody who can talk?"
So this was shortly after the funeral. So they weren't even married yet.
It was within weeks after the funeral. He said some other colorful language along with that as well. But then that's when my little brain was like, oh, maybe he did it. Maybe he was responsible. And so I still carried a lot of guilt for being blamed. And I'm still not 100% sure if any of that was true. He said I was very jealous of Jacob. I don't remember being jealous of Jacob. He said I kicked Jacob in the head. I don't remember doing that. That doesn't mean it didn't happen. But I seriously doubt that a 6-year-old has the strength to create an injury that would that would require him to have it lanced and drained of brain fluid.
Right, and stay in the hospital for 2 days.
Yeah, I think that would require some significant force, and I don't think a 6-year-old is capable of that. I could be wrong.
If you were, I mean, just your mentality would have had to be completely different than what it sounds like you were like as a child to be cold enough to just kick a baby in the head. It doesn't, and especially a baby that you prayed for.
Yeah, I prayed for him. I wanted a brother. I wanted him, and he was a crazy, happy kid, and I love that kid. So, I don't know what to believe still at this point. I guess anything is possible. But I know it's clear that Jacob died as a result of being in his care.
There's definitely enough evidence to make it pretty clear that a prosecution would have been likely, at least as far as well, maybe not likely. I just listened to your conversations with Edna, and just hearing her perspective from the New Mexico legal system. I see what she was saying.
Very frustrating for me to have that conversation.
I bet.
I'm still shocked at what I learned about the justice system and the prerogative of prosecutors to decide whether they're going to try a case based on how winnable it is. That was very angering for me, because I feel like you shouldn't have a choice. If a baby was murdered or a child is murdered, like, you shouldn't have the option to opt out of it because it's a challenging case. Like, I'm sorry if it's bad for your career, but I really don't care about that.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
I don't think the taxpayers would complain about their dollars being spent on that trial.
You have to at least try.
Yeah, you do. It seems, yeah. And I guess I understand, being hesitant to try something if there's not a lot of evidence, but there was evidence in this case. And it just sounds like maybe they need to employ the grand jury more often.
Mm-hmm.
If they're afraid of leveraging charges or whatnot.
Yeah, bring them to the grand jury. Let them decide. And then it's off your back.
It would be at least another step. But I can't imagine how many families have gone through similar things that you have gone through. Just being told, no, we can't do anything about it. I know I've covered a couple of those cases myself, spoken to those families, and it's so frustrating. You've got a petition going. You never know. If some kind of public outcry happens, certain cases, it has made a huge difference.
Yeah. I think it's important. It's important for Jacob to get justice, but it's important for every child in New Mexico and in the United States to get justice. Their abusers are going to continue to pop up if we aren't willing to send a message that we're not going to tolerate it. There's a whole lot of things that I'm going to continue to advocate for. I think the mandatory prosecution of child abuse cases is going to be one of them, along with tougher sentences and things like that. I'm going to work with some lawyers to come up with language that would make it to the point where if it meets these certain criteria, then you don't have a choice. You don't get to decide whether you're going to prosecute this case or not. You have to, and the state's going to require you to. And these are the things that I'm going to start working on once I get to a place where I feel like either Jacob's gotten justice or I've gotten the answer that, we're not moving forward. Mm-hmm. Because at the end of the day, I've kind of come to terms and peace with the fact that we may never have a day in court. We may never get that satisfaction of going to trial. It's not what I want. It doesn't make me happy, but I've come to terms with the fact that that's a possibility. If that's the case, my attention will be on how do I change things so that this doesn't happen again. We were kind of resigned to the fact that there was nothing happening. I mean, it's been 33 years. And even when we had it looked at again in 2005 with a cold case investigator who I think did a phenomenal job, he was so thorough and so intelligent and methodical about the way he approached it. I didn't find this out until later when I requested the documents, but I was very impressed with the level of care he took with the case. But even that wasn't enough to persuade the DA to do anything. So, I think we were kind of already resigned a little bit. Now I have some hope potentially, but again, it could still all fall apart.
You had told me that your mom's house burned down several years after Jacob died and she lost most of her photos. And I can't imagine how she coped with that.
Yeah, she lost a lot of stuff in that fire, and it took us several years to get her back on her feet. Her life has been very traumatic, and I'm doing everything I can to help her and help take care of her and make sure she's okay. And it wasn't until, one day that it just hit me like I could just do this. I could just create a podcast and start talking about these things, that we started to have some more hope, I think. But yeah, it was hard to lose those memories. I think we only have like 3 or 4 pictures of Jacob, maybe 3 total, which is pretty sad.
Yeah, it's got to be hard. It's got to be tough for her. I mean, she's clearly a strong woman to still be standing at this point. So I give her a ton of credit. I can't imagine how she's done it, and she's definitely ready for sainthood, I think.
She'd probably disagree with you on that. I think that, she said it best whenever we wrapped up our episode together, and she said, like, even if Jacob doesn't get justice, if this helps one family, one child, then it'll all be worth it. And I agree with her. if we can make a difference and maybe help save one child or help prevent one case from being forgotten, then all of this pain and turmoil and the show and everything that I've done is worth it.
That's awesome. So you actually started the podcast about a year ago?
It'll be a year and 4 days. Yeah.
All right. Excellent. And I know it took you till season 2 to cover Jacob's case. Was it because you were hesitant to talk about it?
It was a combination of things. I wanted to build a following first. That was kind of the goal in my mind, is I wanted to get some listeners to actually listen to Jacob's story before I put it out there. But the other thing was it was difficult. The conversation that you heard between my mom and I was the first time we ever sat down and talked about it. We'd never sat down and had a conversation about what happened.
Wow.
And most of that was because my family, my broader family, was very resistant to talking about it. And I remember one of the first Thanksgivings after Jacob died, I had mentioned his name and everybody started yelling at me. Not my mom, but my entire family was like, "We are not going to talk about this. We're not going to bring his name up. We don't want to hear it." And so, I remember my grandmother stormed away from the table at Thanksgiving, and it was very dramatic. And after that, we just stopped talking about it because people were uncomfortable. Even our own family members didn't want to talk about it. So we just kind of buried it.
I think that's kind of indicative of the public perception or the public attitude about child abuse and child deaths and things like that. That's kind of why your podcast exists, and mine. It just to bring attention to them. You can't bury it. It's not going away.
Yeah,
and
you can't ignore it.
To be remembered. He's a person.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think that was another reason why I waited so long to cover the case. And the other thing was I wanted to get all of the documentation from the police and from the case investigators to learn more about it before I approached it, because I was 6 years old. So a lot of it, I didn't really have a lot of clarity on a lot of things. And I wanted to be sure that my mom was involved because there were a lot of questions that I had. And, I'm grateful to her for being willing to have that conversation. It was not easy for us. I even tried to spread it out over 3 visits with her. And she's like, "No, we're going to do this today." I was like, wow, okay, here we go.
She needed to get it out.
She did. I think it was very healing for both of us. We were able to come to terms with a lot of things and understand each other more and have more compassion for one another, I think.
Yeah, it must be a huge relief to get it all out there and share what knowledge you have. And I think there were a few things that each of you said that the other just had no idea was in the other's head.
Yeah. Yeah. And there were moments that, we stopped recording things where we talked about some of those things and talked about the fact that we had either of us known things might've been different, but we both kind of were protecting each other by keeping quiet. And that's hard to get rid of too, that mentality. That's the other thing that's kind of scary, putting our story out there. This man is still alive. He's still free. He still lives in the same town that my mom lives in.
Oh.
So those things are horrifying. And then when I see somebody like a post that I post about Jacob that I know is very close to this person, I get that instant sinking feeling in my stomach, and I start to get worried and I get scared, and all of those old feelings come back. It's at the same time, I refuse to let him control me anymore. I refuse to let him control the narrative anymore. And I'm not saying anything that isn't true. And, for people in my hometown, it's not going to take very much for them to figure out who this person is.
I've been doing this a while and I've covered dozens and dozens of cases, but it never fails to shock me when someone is capable of doing something like this. What goes wrong in a person's head to allow them to beat a baby to death?
Yeah, I don't know. And it's interesting because some people, they want to speculate and they want to create these stories or these ideas. And I'm not interested in that. I'm not interested in knowing why he did what he did. That really doesn't do anything for me. What I want is for him to be held accountable for what he did, because it doesn't matter if he was abused as a child. Everybody has a choice on the type of person that they become. I was exposed to horrendous abuse as a child, and you can go one of two ways. You can let it consume you And you can turn into that, or you can try and help people who are in the same situation. And you always have a choice. And it says more about his character and about his mental state that he chose to go that route.
I mean, there's certainly I would never say, well, because he was abused, like it doesn't count as a mitigating factor to me. It doesn't at all. I want to see justice. I'm always interested in how it happened, only in the way of trying to figure out how do we prevent it from happening.
Sure.
But at the same time, especially in this case, 33 years later, that's all moot. It does not matter in the least. What matters is he's been walking around for 33 years while your brother should be 34 or maybe married, have kids of his own. And it's so unfair.
It is. It is. And the shocking part, learning that he has no record, that's just alarming to me. It's like red flag city in my mind. How is that even possible? I mean, there's no way he changed. There's no way he stopped doing what he was doing.
You're right. They don't change very often. It's very, very rare.
But all I know is I don't care that it's been 33 years. He needs to come to account for what he's done.
Yeah, the passing of time does not lessen what he did. And what he took from you.
And he stole my brother's life. You know, my brother hadn't even begun to live his life yet.
But there's no telling what he could have accomplished.
I'm sure he would have been a nightmare teenager because he was crazy.
He sounded fun just from what you and your mom were saying.
I think we probably would have gotten into a lot of trouble together.
Oh, boy. Do you have any other siblings?
I have a half-sister with my mom and 2 half-brothers with my father.
Okay. Are they younger or older?
They're younger.
Yeah. Okay. So, you were the first and then Jacob was second.
I was actually the second. But my brother Randy and his twin, the twin was miscarried, and Randy passed away shortly after birth.
Oh my gosh, I'm sorry.
He had a bad heart.
Your mom's definitely been through it. My gosh,
she has. She's a fighter, and I'm very persistent. So
that's a good team. What is your mom up to now?
She's retired. She's crocheting and taking care of her dog, her best friend.
That's great. Yeah. And she has grandkids.
Yep. I have a soon-to-be 15-year-old son, and my sister has. Thank you. Yeah. My sister has a 7-year-old daughter, and my mom gets to be a grandma, and she also helps take care of my grandmother, who's elderly and aging, and she's very high energy. You know, she doesn't act like an 80 something year old woman. She acts like she's 60 or 50.
Wow. It's got to be genetic. You guys have got this fighting spirit.
Yeah. And I think growing up where we grew up, you kind of have to as well. So you don't have a choice.
Right. Do you still talk to your dad at all? Is there any?
My dad passed away this year of coronavirus.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah. He died in July. My dad and I didn't have a good relationship. There was a lot of pain there because after Jacob died, I didn't see him again until I was about 12, and he didn't call or write or anything. And so, you know, we both had our issues. We both had our pain to deal with, and it got in the way. And so we never really got to resolve anything before he died.
I'm sorry. I did not realize that.
Well, I haven't really talked about it a lot. It's I'm still kind of dealing with it.
Sure.
Coming to terms with that, but it was fast, you know.
Yeah.
It was like 2 weeks.
Did he still live in California?
He was actually back in Texas.
Oh, okay. How many podcasts or other places have you gotten the story out?
I think there's about 5 right now.
I saw you put it out there a couple months ago, and I wrote down Jacob's name, and I'm like, I'm going to get to that one. And like I said, just the list of cases just keeps growing so long, and I can never cover all the ones I want to. I do want to get to Victoria Martins. I know you've mentioned her.
I'm doing her for season 3. She's the first 2 episodes of season 3. Yeah.
Oh, good. Yeah. I mean, her case is just so sad. It's really incredible how many people do this. I know you'd mentioned baby Brianna too, which is, I want to cover her case so much. I haven't gotten to it yet because it's going to take me a very long time. It's so intensive and horrific. And the fact that her mother's walking around right now is infuriating.
Yeah, this is it's a big problem, and I am so grateful that you're here doing this as well, because I think there needs to be more people telling these stories. I've seen a lot of conversation and chatter about your show online, and it seems like people are pretty into it, and it's exciting.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on in Facebook groups where they're like, "Oh my God, I'm listening to this podcast," and I see your show come up a lot. So,
oh, that's cool. That's really good to hear.
Yeah.
But yeah, it has to get out there. So I'm just so glad your podcast is out there too, and you're telling these difficult stories, and it's cool that you're kind of concentrating in the Southwest.
I really wanted to address the problems that we have here, and there's a lot, because they'll talk about it, but it's kind of vague. And I think telling these stories really paints a clear picture of what's going on.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad that you reached out to me and that we got to do this, because I think this is such an important story to get out there. And
thank you, Lane.
You're welcome. Jacob deserves to be remembered, and we're not going to let him be forgotten. That's for sure. I hope you guys enjoyed my conversation with Eric. I certainly did. His devotion to getting justice for his baby brother is inspiring, and his passion for the cases he covers shines through in all of his episodes. This week he released his Season 3 premiere episode, part 1 of his coverage of the Victoria Martins case. I can't recommend True Consequences highly enough, so please subscribe to Eric's show and follow him on social media as well. Before I wrap up this episode, I want to talk about Jacob Jeremiah Landin for just a moment. He was 9 months old when he left this earth, and from everything Eric and his mom Brenda have said, he was an absolute joy, just the happiest, most energetic, funniest baby, who brought both chaos and laughter with him wherever he went. This little boy deserves justice, and so does his family. I hope with all my heart that all of Eric's work in spreading Jacob's story and creating public pressure on the authorities will spur them to act and ultimately lead to the conviction of Jacob's killer. I also hope that no matter what the outcome of Jacob's case, Brenda and Eric can find peace and meaning in all of it, and can heal from everything they've been through for the past 33 years, while they've waited and pushed for justice for Jacob. That's it for this week, guys. Join me next week for another case. If you like the show, please leave me a 5-star rating and a positive review on your favorite podcast platform. And please subscribe to Suffer the Little Children on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast listening app. Email tips, comments, questions, or case suggestions to sufferthelittlechildren.pod@gmail.com. You can also subscribe on YouTube by searching Suffer the Little Children Podcast. Visit the website at www.sufferthelittlechildrenpod.com, where you can listen to episodes and become a patron for rewards ranging from a shout-out by name on the show to exclusive gifts. Follow the podcast on Facebook, Instagram, Tumblr, and Pinterest at Suffer the Little Children Pod, and on Twitter at STLCpod. View photos related to today's case on Facebook and Instagram. Read more about today's case and many others at sufferthelittlechildrenblog.com. This podcast was written, hosted, edited, and produced by Lane. Intro theme music is by Dream Note Music. Other music and sound effects for the show were created using sounds from audiojungle.net. Hug your babies a bit closer tonight. Until next week, bye guys.